But then as we were going to different events throughout the past year, whether it be DevCon, ETHDenver, and others, what we realized is there's just a lot of excitement around the SUI ecosystem, a lot of builders. And to us, that was like a key indicator of a place that we'd want to build and be a part of.
Don't look at the markets now, because if you're just focused on the price, things are not looking great. But these are the times when you really have to look between the lines and understand what's actually being built, who's going to the conferences, what is actually being developed, what's going to be that narrative when we do come back up. Because reality is, it's just a matter of time, not if, but when. So with that said, one of the ecosystems that has been flourishing prior to this market slump has been SUI. And although SUI hasn't been called out for being on the crypto reserve, there's still a very high probability that SUI will continue its rise. And the question is, why is it doing well? Well, today I wanted to talk to one of the builders that is building in the space. He's actually no stranger to the channel. So first, let me share a little bit about this project. It's called Bolt Liquidity. It's the first on-demand liquidity network, so we're going to learn a little bit about that. Now, I will say, given the market conditions, now is a good time to really learn about this stuff, because although there's no token around Bolt Liquidity, nor would I recommend buying anything right now, you want to start learning about the tech. And so we're going to dive deeper into what Bolt Liquidity is, how are they working with SUI, and there's nobody better to explain all this than Max, longtime friend of the channel. Max, welcome back. How are you?
Doing great, man. Just got back from ETHDenver. Had a great time there. And yeah, it's awesome to be back on the show. It's been a while since I was able to connect with you, but I think there's a lot of good stuff to talk about, both with SUI and what we're doing with Bolt.
For sure. I was at ETHDenver as well, and I can definitely attest to the craziness that was out there. And I feel like the builders, they just did not really care about what's happening on the price side. They're focused on building, which is what we all need them to do. I'm seeing a lot of partnerships start to flourish around SUI. For instance, Supra, which started off as an Oracle, now they're a chain. Also, BitLayer. Well, let me backtrack. The BitLayer was an event that I actually attended at ETHDenver, and there were a lot of Bitcoin DeFi startups that were out there. And SUI, I believe, actually made a few announcements around partnerships with Bitcoin DeFi plays. And so you're starting to see this collaboration between not just everybody in Web3, but even within the Bitcoin ecosystem. They're not all maxis. That's something that I've noticed. What about for you? What was the reason why you decided to gravitate towards SUI?
It's really just because of all the growth that we've seen in the ecosystem over the past year or so, both on-chain in terms of metrics, like when you're looking at a number of new wallets, TVL, volume that is happening on SUI. But then as we were going to different events throughout the past year, whether it be DevCon, ETHDenver, and others, what we realized is there's just a lot of excitement around the SUI ecosystem, a lot of builders. And to us, that was like a key indicator of a place that we'd want to build and be a part of, because really those are the types of projects that you see flourish in, for example, like a bull market. The ones that even in some of the more down days of the market, still have a lot of excitement, still have a lot of new people coming on board and building new products. So as we kind of saw all the excitement and all the people attending their events, it really stuck out to us as one of those protocols that we'd certainly want to be partnering with and building on top of.
And to your point, you just kind of briefly touched on this, but even just looking at the SUI market cap, it's up 153.6% quarter over quarter to 12.1 billion, ranking 15th. Now, this chart is for last year, so obviously we know what happened beginning of the year, but nonetheless, from a technology perspective, things are looking good. The other thing, this is something that you and I have discussed previously on other episodes, is the importance of fees. And when you look at the SUI's fees, they've increased by 613.6% quarter over quarter to 5.4 million. What do you make of that number?
Well, I mean, it's just showing that they have a lot of real on-chain users, people who are willing to spend a little bit of their own money to participate in the ecosystem. And to me, that's huge, right? Like what a lot of times you'll have these networks that may have a lot of on-chain activity, but it's not really generating fees, whether that's because they're not really interacting with a lot of different applications, or just the fees in general are so minuscule that it doesn't amount to much in terms of value accrual to the protocol. So to me, that's always a great sign. It shows that people are willing to take a little bit of their, financial risk by interacting and utilizing the products, which means those products must offer something to them that they see as valuable.
And, I've had traders on before, and I understand the importance of looking at technical analysis versus, what's being said in the media. But this is the other component that I feel is very important, which is understanding the fees, the on-chain activity, the development, and a lot of the stuff can be misconstrued and manipulated. But honestly, outside of Solana, if I had to ask what other ecosystem has been flourishing, during a bumpy road, I would say SUI is probably one of the few.
I would agree. And what's actually very interesting is that over this past week at ETHDenver, I actually had 3 or maybe 4 different people all say the same thing to me, which is the SUI ecosystem right now feels like how Solana felt before it had its massive, rise in value and token price, which was interesting to me because I actually had a similar thought. You can like feel that bubbling of excitement and interest in the stack as well as just the applications being built on top of it. To me, that's super exciting to hear and see as someone who's now building on top of the SUI protocol. But yeah, it's very interesting to hear people say that because like I said, felt very similar. And it just shows how much momentum that SUI has, and it's showing in both the metrics and in the sentiment, which is rare.
I'm glad you bring up the fact that it gives off Solana vibes, because I remember last cycle, one of the negatives against Solana was that it was heavily VC backed, that they were going to dump on you. And a lot of that had to do with the tokenomics, right? So when you're looking at the SUI tokenomics, 2.48% of the total supply unlocked in Q4 2024. This is the other thing that is kind of going against SUI, right? I mean, the demand has to be very high in order to keep up with all of the unlocks. We've discussed this before on the channel, how some of these altcoins, great technology, but they just dump on the retail, and the retail is not following along on the journey to become wealthy with the project. Based on that, I mean, how do you feel SUI can overcome that?
Well, I think part of it will be just demand. Like I think they will have a high level of demand to use their product. And on top of that, I do think because they're so well funded, they don't have as much of an incentive to need to sell the token. They were able to raise, I think, over 200 million when they were actually raising for the protocol, so they're very well funded. So I don't think they're in a position where selling the token is something that they need to do. And given the amount of momentum, I don't think at these levels it makes a ton of sense for them to offload supply. Now that's just my viewpoint on it. I can't get inside the head of the insiders and VCs, but I do think a lot of them see this as the very early stages of SUI. So I think a lot of them will want to hold on to what they have and really focus on building value to the actual platform, ecosystem, all of it, before they even consider doing things like selling off.
And going back to what you guys are focused on at Bolt Liquidity, I mean, look at the SUI DeFi TVL It's increased 107.6% quarter over quarter to 2.26 billion. So, I mean, I think this bodes well for the type of product that you guys are getting ready to launch, as long as you can execute on that product, right? As long as there's a need, the demand looks like can very well be there. I'm sure this chart looks a lot different now given the current circumstances, but again, this is not by luck.
Yeah. And what's actually really interesting about Bolt is that TVL is a great metric for people to understand how much liquidity is in an ecosystem, especially if you're trading on it. But what Bolt tries to solve actually is the whole liquidity crisis and actually allowing you to do a lot more with less. So TVL to us, it may not be the most important metric as much as volume, because what we've designed should be able to provide efficient pricing on lower levels of liquidity. So that's something I think is very interesting, is just the making liquidity more efficient, because a lot of times you have a ton of TVL, but you can't necessarily offer the best pricing, because you need significant amounts of depth in these pools in order to really provide tight spreads when you're swapping.
So let's fast forward. This is, let's say we're in September, October. It's meme coin season, on SUI, and I'm trading. So what is the overall impact of Bolt Liquidity here? Am I just going to be able to get in and out of trades a lot quicker, a lot more seamlessly, with the Bolt Liquidity aspect added to it?
Yeah, so that's the hopes, right? So Bolt Liquidity, you mentioned it, it's like an on-demand liquidity network is kind of what we've called it, with the goal of really aiming to facilitate zero slippage or near zero slippage cross-chain and native swaps. What's unique about it is that we won't actually be providing a front end. So what we'll do is we'll work directly with the existing DeFi applications in the ecosystem. So for SUI, we've talked to teams like Aftermath, Cetus, FlowX, some of these other aggregators, where we'll essentially have a single API that will plug in directly to their existing interface. So what we're basically offering is an additional liquidity source for these aggregators to provide better pricing. So to your point, what we are trying to facilitate is more efficient, more secure, and fast trades, so you can get in and out of whatever pairs you'd like. We'll probably initially focus on a lot of the non-native or bridged assets. So when you look at like a protocol like SUI, they probably have pretty good depth in their SUI pools, right? Because they have a lot of SUI on the network. But what they might not have as good a liquidity on are things like wrapped Bitcoin, wrapped ETH, things like even Solana. So we'll be focusing more on providing support for those pairs, so that when users do want to trade, they're able to get the best prevailing price, whether that price is on a centralized exchange like Bybit or Binance or Coinbase, or if it's on a DEX and Solana. It doesn't really matter where that liquidity is, as long as that liquidity and that depth exists, we can essentially replicate it on chain, wherever an outpost is deployed. So that's something that's super interesting about Bolt, is we're kind of dubbing it like a centralized exchange replication engine, because what we can do is we can replicate the liquidity environments from centralized exchanges on chain. So we're looking at things like the current price, the liquidity depth in the order book, the trades that are coming through and the trade that's being submitted, factoring all these in to come up with the most efficient price, and filling those orders on chain.
Amazing. What's next for you guys?
So we're pretty much done building out the SUI implementation of Bolt. So over the next week or so, we'll be rolling it out in somewhat of a soft launch phase with Aftermath. And we'll be doing it with small amounts of liquidity, essentially just to test it and make sure that it's functioning as intended. Get some feedback from the Aftermath team on things that could potentially be improved. But assuming all goes well in that soft launch, we'll then scale the liquidity and then also deploy it to more of the aggregators on top of SUI. We've already received a lot of interest from many of the teams like Cetus, FlowX. We've talked to 7K and really a lot of the other aggregators, including Navi, that are deployed on SUI. So long as it works as intended, I think all of them intend on integrating it into their liquidity sources. So we're thinking over the next couple weeks or month, we'll be able to really be integrated with most of the aggregators on SUI. And then once we've kind of have that completed, we'll then start to focus on deploying these outposts on other ecosystems like the EVM, so things like Base. And then, of course, we'd like to support some of the newer networks that are coming live, like Monad, Movement, and some of these others as well. But first, we want to focus on deploying the SUI version, making sure everything's working as intended, and then we'll start to work on the EVM and even like Aptos Move implementations.
No token yet. Any plans down the road?
So the plan is to eventually probably have a token for Bolt. I can't divulge a lot of information on the use cases yet, but for now we're just going to operate without one. But yeah, in the future there will certainly be a Bolt token, and we'll definitely be providing more information not only on the utility and tokenomics, but also how you'll acquire that token.
Max, how can we as a community help and support your work?
I mean, at this point, it's probably most helpful just to help share what we're doing, because the idea of Bolt is really, first and foremost, to help the users, because when a user is swapping on a lot of these different exchanges or liquidity pools, they're not getting great pricing, right? You're constantly getting slippage, especially if you're trading in any sort of size. Bolt really aims to solve this problem, and that ultimately gives users the most bang for their buck. When they do a trade, they don't receive slippage, and they really get what they're paying for. So just sharing kind of the concepts around Bolt, sharing Bolt to other applications and ecosystems to have them become aware of what we're trying to do is super helpful to us. But ultimately, it's a B2B product in the sense that we work directly with the applications to integrate into their existing front ends. So there's no change to their UX. It creates a very simple integration process for them, and then they can offer better pricing. And if you're an aggregator, that's really what you're competing on is pricing. Can you offer the best price? If so, people will utilize your product. So not only do the users and the actual applications benefit from this, it also solves a lot of issues from the liquidity provider's perspective. Because we're doing it in a unique way. And the reason we're able to offer this zero slippage is because we're doing single-sided pools, which we actually dubbed our single base multi-quote pools, because what you're basically saying is the LP will deposit one asset. Let's say it's wrapped Bitcoin. They deposit just wrapped Bitcoin into this pool, and they can service trades for multiple different tokens, whether it's Ethereum, SUI, Solana, what have you. So you're not creating a separate liquidity pool for the Bitcoin USDC pair, Bitcoin SUI pair, Bitcoin Ethereum. It's all one pool. And so therefore it just creates much more efficient liquidity. So that's another thing I think is super unique about Bolt, that makes it really valuable. And that's what allows us to really offer that zero slippage, that paired with the actual efficient pricing oracle that will be providing the price proofs.
Looking forward to staying in touch. How can people get a hold of you if they have any questions about Bolt Liquidity?
Yeah, so they can always reach out to me directly, whether that's on Telegram or Twitter, and that's at CryptoChem with 4 zeros. Otherwise, they can check out boltliquidity.io if they just want to learn more about the actual project, or follow us on Twitter. That's always a great place to get the most up-to-date information, and that's at Bolt Liquidity. So those are probably the best spots for now to keep up to date with what we're doing. And yeah, if you're part of the SUI ecosystem, you may start to see us pop up as we continue to partner with a lot of these different teams. And we're excited about that, and excited to really give more information on Bolt, the architecture, and the problems we're trying to solve in the space.
Thanks, Max. And those that are watching, if you found this video helpful, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it with your friends, help and support our guests and Bolt Liquidity, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.
Thanks for having me.